Great.
Thank you, Mindy.
Thank you, Mindy.
Okay, let me talk by just mentioning the genesis of this talk. In 2018, I was asked by the Friends meeting in Manasquan, the Quakers there, where I was doing some voter registration at their request, if I could come and help them out in the name of the League of Women Voters. What was going on is that they, like all of us, I think, were feeling the anxiety and stress of a national angst. That since 2016, there is a sense of polarization and lack of civility that is distressing in the extreme to many people. And the Quakers were asking me if the League had any advice for them in how they could make a significant difference and be involved in moving things in the right direction without jumping into the partisan fray. So that was my assignment, to come and talk to them about what kind of action could be taken that kind of rose above the partisanship that characterizes our nation right now. And the result of that was, I went away thinking about the question very seriously. And this material that I've taken from many sources is really an effort to give them a thoughtful answer to that question. So what I'm going to ask you to do over the next hour is suspend your disbelief for a moment and consider this hypothesis. What I'm asking you to do is to consider the possibility that the threat that we're all feeling to our democracy is not a person. It's not even a party. It's really non-participation. The health and the strength of our democracy depends on the informed participation of citizens. And as we have seen, too many Americans are sitting on the sidelines. Beto O'Rourke, whom we all met in the last round of Democratic primaries and debates, the last rounds, put it this way: he's from Texas, and it is notoriously a red state. He said, no, Texas is not a red state. It's a we don't vote state. So it's really a profound way of looking at it. What he's referring to is that only a smidge over half of the eligible voters in Texas cast a ballot in 2016. Texas ranks 48th in the nation in voter turnout. And it's not just Texas. If we look at the country as a whole, and all of my statistics in this material come from the 2016 election. So in 2016, 4 out of every 10 Americans who could have voted didn't. So that's a 62% voter turnout. So about 140 million people voted. About 92 million did not vote out of an eligible 230 some million. Eligible, when you look at most analyses of election and turnout, it's important to know what the denominator is, like it's how many turned out compared to what. Eligible, most cases, means those who meet the requirements to register, not necessarily those who are registered, but those who could register if they chose to. So it's a pretty dismal turnout. Here's an interesting way to look at it. So bear with me while I explain this to you, this map. So this map shows what the results of the 2016 election would have been if the people who did not vote were counted as voting for a candidate called did not vote. So what you're looking at is all of these tan states where the number of people who did not vote was larger than the number of people who voted for either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. So all of that brownish beige there, did not vote, no vote, was the winner. The half dozen blue states that you see on the map are the states where Hillary Clinton won more votes than the number of people who didn't vote in that state. And the two red states are the two states that Donald Trump won more votes than the number of votes of voters who did not show up or cast a ballot. So if we considered no vote the name of a candidate, no vote would have won the 2016 election with 471 Electoral College votes compared to Clinton's 51 and Trump's 16. So what you have is a nation of non-participants and leaving the contest up to a little more than half of the rest. So let's figure out what's going on that keeps those people from voting. If our hypothesis is that our democracy depends on informed participation, the meaningful question is, why aren't people participating? So what this slide shows us are the 6 top turnout states and the 6 lowest turnout states. So Minnesota is the shining star with a measly 3/4 of the eligible voters turning out. So even in Minnesota, 1 out of 4 eligible voters is not casting a ballot. So it's Minnesota, Maine, New Hampshire, Colorado, Wisconsin, and Iowa. And it wasn't just in 2016. This list of states chronically shows up in the top tier of voter turnout. If we look at the lowest, it goes from Hawaii at 43% down to as the lowest. And then West Virginia, Texas, Tennessee, and Arizona are in that kind of hall of shame of lowest voter turnout states. So now we have some data about where are people turning out. The next step is to say what explains what's different in those high turnout states from what is the situation in the lowest turnout states. What explains this difference in turnout? Well, it turns out that there are 2 critical variables. There are 2 critical reasons that have more impact on voter turnout than any other. The first is the ease of registering to vote. So it turns out that in the highest turnout states, they all share this characteristic. They offer same-day registration. In all of the lowest turnout states, they cut off registration between 3 and 4 weeks before election day. Those of you who live in, most of you on this call probably know that New Jersey, who is 14th overall in voter turnout, not too bad. New York is 44th, New York State. So we do pretty well. But we cut our registration off 3 weeks before. We have very recently done 2 things though. In 2018, we implemented automatic voter registration. So when you interact with motor vehicles or other state agencies, you're automatically registered unless you opt out. And this year, the legislature has approved online voter registration. The coronavirus, COVID-19 has delayed the implementation of that. So New Jersey is moving in the right direction in terms of ease of registration. The second variable that accounts for high voter turnout is whether or not a state is a swing state, also called a battleground state. And for those, just to make sure everyone understands the term, it means a swing state is one in which the outcome of the election is up for grabs. They're not clearly red state, they're not clearly a blue state. And if you look at the highest turnout states, all 5 of the 6 of them are swing states, or they were in 2016. And if you look at the lowest turnout states, none of them are swing states. So let's look at why it is that swing state status makes such a difference. The Electoral College creates swing states. Here's just a quick little civics review. When we cast our vote for the presidential candidate of our choice, we are actually not voting for the candidate. We are voting for electors who will go after the general election and cast their vote for the candidate they have pledged to, and So it's the electoral votes that elect the president, not the popular vote. And in all but 2 states, that electoral college member is required and mandated to cast his or her vote for the winner of the popular election in that state. So let me repeat. The president is actually elected by the electors. The electors go meet together after the general election and cast their votes for the winners of the popular vote in their individual states, in all but 2 states. Those 2 states are Maine and Nebraska, and those 2 states have a proportional system where the first 2 of their electoral votes go to the overall state popular vote winner, and then they meet out the rest of their electoral votes on a congressional district by congressional district basis. So the winner of each congressional district gets that vote in the Electoral College. So I'm sorry to bore you with those details. I just want to make sure everybody's comfortable that they understand how it all works. So this is what happens then. In states where a party has a comfortable margin, candidates have no reason to campaign there. And because they basically ignore the spectator states, which are the opposite of the swing states, the spectator states, called so because they kind of just watch what's happening, they're not in the game. They don't go there, they don't make any campaign stops there, they don't spend any money there. And if they're an incumbent, they disproportionately shortchange the spectator states in things like grants and funding for transportation, emergency, and other such things. So we have a 2-tier system, basically. We have states in this country that have a role to play in determining the election, swing states, and we have those that are safe and comfortable to the candidates in either party, called spectator states. And why does that matter? Because the spectator states have a significantly higher percentage of voter turnout. What this graph shows us, the red circles, are the percent turnout in presidential elections between 2000 and 2016. The bluish green circles are the turnout in the same election years in non-battleground spectator states. And you can see the number in red at the bottom is the advantage in turnout in percentage points that the swing state has over the spectator state. So this is why that works. The number 1 reason that people give for not voting is my vote doesn't count. So if you're a Democrat and you live in a red state, or you're a Republican and you live in a blue state, you feel that your vote doesn't count, and you're right. So it turns out that the Electoral College, by creating this 2-tier system of states, discourages voter turnout, and voter turnout is critical to the health of our democracy. But the damage that the Electoral College does not stop there. There are at least 4 other ways. And I say at least because when I first started giving this talk, there were 2 other ways. And I keep thinking of new ways. So at the current moment, there are 4 other ways. So one is that it discounts, we're going to go through each of these in detail, but it discounts votes, it divides us, it increases election vulnerability, and it overrides the will of the people. Let's take them one at a time. We're going to do a little bit of arithmetic here, so bear with me. It sounds complicated, but the concept is pretty basic. Remember, we said that all states have the number of electoral votes that equals the number of people they send to Congress. So every state, regardless of its size, regardless of its population, starts with 2 electors representing their 2 senators. So every state starts with 2. And then they're given additional electors based on the number of people they send to the House of Representatives, and that's based on their population. But remember, every state is starting with 2. So let's look at what happens because of this. We're going to take 2 states, tiny little Delaware and a neighboring state, Virginia, and we're going to look at their electoral votes and what those electoral votes represent in terms of number of people and number of voters. So on the left, you see little Delaware sitting there with just under 1 million people, but Delaware has 3 electoral college votes, 2 senators and 1 House of Representatives congressperson. So if we take the population, nearly 1 million, and we divide it by 3, you can see that each of the electoral college votes from the Delaware electorates is representing 321,000 people. Everybody got that? 1 million people, 3 electoral college votes, about 321,000 people per electoral college vote. Let's look at Virginia on the right. Virginia has about 8.5 million people. They have 13 electoral college votes. They're 2 senators plus their 11 Congress people. If we divide the population, 8.5 million, by their 13 electoral college votes, each electoral college vote represents 651,000 people. And let's just take it down one more level. Let's just look at the people who actually voted in the presidential election in those states. Go back to Delaware, 445,000. We divide that by 3. Each one of the electoral college vote represented about 150,000 voters. If you look at Virginia on the right-hand side, they had a little more than 4 million voters. You divide that by their 13 electoral college votes. Each of their electoral college votes represented 311,000 voters. That means that Delaware votes, electoral college votes, Delaware popular votes count twice as much as Virginia votes. Follow that? Because look at the number of voters represented by each electoral college vote in the 2 states. Delaware popular vote counts twice what a Virginia popular vote counts. All right, I'm going to go through it again. Maybe it'll be a little clearer. And this time we're going to do it with a comparison that we really care about. Let's compare the state of Wyoming with 500,000 people to the state of New Jersey with 8.8 million people. I'm sorry, yeah, so about 600,000 people, a little more than 500,000. Wyoming, because it starts with 2 senators, even though it doesn't even have 1 million people, still gets 3 electoral college votes. So if we divide their population by their 3 votes, each one of their electoral college votes is counting for 193,000 people. Now look at New Jersey. New Jersey has 14 electoral college votes. If we do the math, divide our 8.8 by 14, it means that each one of our electoral college votes is representing over 500,000 people. And if we look at the voters, as we did in the other comparison, they had, in Wyoming, they had 86,000, they had 259,000 votes. That if you divide that by their 3 electoral college votes, each one of their electoral college votes represented 86,000 popular votes. By contrast, in New Jersey, each electoral college vote represented 283,000 voters. It means that the people who cast their vote in the presidential election in Wyoming have 3 times the say at the Electoral College than a person casting a vote in the presidential election in New Jersey. And I'd just like to point out to you that the population of Wyoming is 579,000 people. Let's round it off. 600,000 people. The population of Monmouth County is 630,000 people. So it was as if Monmouth County was given 3 electoral college votes. So the Electoral College does not pass the fairness test. If you were to ask an 8th grader, what would you say was the most important indication of a democracy being fair? They would probably, in some form or other, come up with the idea that one person got one vote. And we have just shown through our arithmetic that not all votes are created equal in the Electoral College. So let's move on. I'm also going to maintain to you that the Electoral College hurts our democracy by dividing us. And we have, at least in my lifetime, which is pretty darn long, I don't ever remember a time, even in the 60s, where our country was more divided politically. So this is the map that shows our self-image as the United States of America. This is the map of red states and blue states following the 2016 presidential election, in which Trump won 306 and Hillary Clinton won 232 of the necessary 270 Electoral College votes required to win. Just a quick little footnote here. If you add up all of the Electoral College votes from all 50 states and the District of Columbia, the sum is 538. 270 represents the majority of the 538. So whoever gets to that majority is the winner. So when we think of ourselves as a country, we think of ourselves as the coastal blue states and the heartland red states. And that's our image of ourselves. And that's what creates that sense of difference, of partisanship, of not belonging, of alienation of the other, of the enemy. But let's look at what's really going on behind those red and blue colors. Let's take the state of California. California has 55, I believe. Let me just check my notes. 55 electoral votes up for grabs, right? And in 2016, 32% of California voters voted for Trump. That would add up to 4.5 million Trump voters. But what happened when the Electoral College met? California cast all 55 of its Electoral College votes for the winner of the popular vote in California. It turned the state blue, basically disenfranchising and throwing away the vote of 4.5 million Trump voters. So even though we think of California as the bluest of the blue, it's almost a third red, or a third, in this case, Trump voters. Let's look at Georgia, Deep South. 46% of voters in Georgia in the 2016 election voted for Hillary Clinton. That's 1.9 million Hillary Clinton voters. But when the Electoral College convened following the general election, all of the Electoral College votes, all 16 of them for the state of Georgia, cast their votes for the winner of the popular vote in Georgia, turning Georgia fully red. So just take a minute and think about that. In the Deep South, Georgia was nearly half of its voters, had nearly half of its voters cast for Hillary Clinton. And we can do this for every one of the states. In Colorado, 43% voted for Trump, but it turned blue on the day that the Electoral College cast its vote, disenfranchising 1.2 million Trump voters. Alabama, the reddest of the red states, more than a third of the voters in 2016 cast their vote for Clinton. That added up to 750,000 Clinton voters who, again, you might as well have burned their votes and thrown them away because they were not reflected at all in that map or in the count of electoral votes. So let's look at it in a different way. Let's look at the most lopsided Electoral College victory in modern history, probably in our lifetime. And that would have been in 1984 between Walter Mondale and Ronald Reagan. You look at that map and you go, oh, an unbelievable blowout. Mondale got 13 Electoral College votes, his own state of Minnesota and the District of Columbia. But when you look at the map in the upper right-hand corner, it's purple because that reflects the distribution of the popular vote. It's still a decisive victory by Reagan. But Mondale got 41% of the vote to Reagan's 59%. And what you're seeing there is a much more diverse country than the mandate that the lower right-hand map tends to give us, and the self-image that it imprints in our minds about where the country stands and the mandate that is given to the president. In other words, a president who is feeling that they won 525 to 13 is different than the mandate that you get 59 to 41, and your responsibility to the people who didn't vote for you is much greater in the upper right-hand map than it is in the lower left-hand map. So the Electoral College is working against a sense of unity in this country, beyond labeling us as red or blue. The presidential election, the President of the United States is the one and only elected office in this country that represents the entire nation. The senators, the House of Representatives are representing their specific geographical constituencies. It is only the president that is elected to represent everyone in the country. But the Electoral College is encouraging candidates to target and favor certain states and regions in order to win. Their attention and their money and their time and their resources goes to the swing states, and their loyalty goes to the swing states. Just look at where the candidates will be campaigning, even virtually. Well, I guess virtually you're campaigning without boundaries, but if there are any in-person campaign events, and certainly if you look at where the money is being spent on advertising, it will be in the half dozen or so swing states for the 2016 election. So if we move on to the next jeopardy that we're in because of the Electoral College, it occurred to me, if you really think about it, the Electoral College is really increasing the vulnerability of our elections to hacking. So we know that there was interference in the 2016 election. This is an image of a Facebook campaign by robots, possibly from the Soviet Union, or from Russia rather, that were telling people they could vote from home. Misinformation and information meant to increase the sense of polarization among voters. And the conversation for the 2016 election is that we not only have to worry about Russia, we have to worry about China, and we have to worry about Iran in terms of not so much hacking the election mechanisms, but certainly doing their best to influence voters to cast votes in a certain way. So how does the Electoral College play in this? Now you got to think about this, right? We have the Electoral College. We have some examples of how a small number of votes in a given state in a given presidential election year could have made the difference in the election. So let's look at 2004. In 2004, a difference of 60,000 votes in Ohio, which is pretty a small number when you're thinking of the total population of eligible voters, would have elected John Kerry. In other words, if John Kerry won Ohio in 2004, he would have won the presidential election, and he only needed a difference of 60,000 votes for that win to have taken place. So in that case, that difference would have favored the Democrats. If we go to 2000, we know from our memory that fewer than 600 Florida votes would have elected Al Gore, and that would have swung the results of the election. So remember that, the number is 600. So if somebody were really strategic about it and they wanted to interfere with the 2000 election, what they needed to do was influence votes in the state of Florida. And they only needed to influence fewer than 1,000 of them, which makes us pretty vulnerable if you compare it to how many votes would you have to influence or tamper with if you wanted to shift the results of the popular election. That same election that was decided by fewer than 600 votes in the state of Florida had a half a million vote discrepancy in the popular vote. Of course, it was Gore that had the popular vote advantage in that election. But nonetheless, if you were voting by popular vote and eliminated the Electoral College, the amount of influencing you would have to do would be in the hundreds of thousands at a minimum in a close election. Whereas in the Electoral College, as we've just seen, it can be as few as less than 1,000 to influence the outcome of a state. So my hypothesis is that the Electoral College is making us more vulnerable. And then the fourth one is the one that most people would come up with if you ask them what's wrong with the Electoral College. They would say that in 5 different presidential elections, it has overridden the will of the people. So in 1824, 1876, 1888, 2000, 2016, the winner of the popular vote did not win the Electoral College, and the winner of the Electoral College became the President of the United States. And recent analyses, statistical analyses of probabilities for the 2020 election show that it could happen again, the way that the states are divided between red and blue in the country right now. So here's the question you're probably asking yourself. If the Electoral College was such a bad idea, what in the world were the founding fathers thinking, right? Why did they come up with this system if it was as flawed as I have suggested to you that it is? Here's what was going on, as best we can tell, in their writings about the deliberation over the election of the president. They rejected the parliamentary system. They had just gotten rid of England, and the last thing that they wanted was a system like England's, where the legislative branch elects the prime minister. So they knew they didn't want that. So that meant, okay, the people are going to decide, but how are they going to decide? And they rejected the direct vote by people. And as best I can determine, there were 2 primary reasons for this. And the first was logistics. You can imagine it's 1788, 1789. The logistics of getting information about the candidates and the candidates getting themselves in front of the populace was really a difficult thing to do. The founders feared that each state would vote for their favorite son, the candidate from their state, and states like Virginia, which had large populations, would win the popular vote just by virtue of the fact that the people in Virginia didn't know anything about the people from Delaware and the smaller states. So there were logistical problems about communicating information, getting to know the candidates, and conducting the vote itself. The second big, ugly, embarrassing, painful reason is that there was a tremendous pushback from the southern states, because in those states, 1/3 of their population was enslaved people who would not be given the vote. And so the southern states, given a popular vote by the people, would be cut off from 1/3 of their people in having a voice in who elected the president of the United States. So they weren't buying a popular vote. The Electoral College was a compromise. It was towards the end. They knew it was a given that George Washington was going to be the first president of the United States. So they were thinking in theory beyond the terms of George Washington. It was under pressure. One of the last things decided on, the Constitution gives the authority over voting to the states, and the Electoral College was the first choice of very few and the second choice of many. So it was not the first choice for most of the founders, but it appeased the southern states. Why did it appease the southern states? Because if you base the Electoral College on congressional representation, the Constitution had given the southern states the credit for 3/5 of a person for each enslaved person. So the southern states were getting representation of their enslaved people through the Electoral College, and so they were willing to sign off on it. And then the other thing was that given this concern about the logistics and the ability of the people to pick and to make an informed vote for a candidate, they developed and designed the Electoral College system expecting that the electors would not be bound by any popular vote in the state, but they would use their judgment. They would be educated men, of course, who would have taken the time to learn about the candidates, and that they would exercise their discretion in casting their votes. It's not at all how the Electoral College works today. And the concerns that got us to this point, that brought us the Electoral College, obviously don't apply in today's world. So what's the answer? The long-term, permanent, safe answer is to amend the Constitution and abolish the Electoral College and design that and designate that the winner of the popular vote in all 50 states and the District of Columbia will be the President of the United States. It's that simple. Can the Electoral College give the people the right to choose their president? But when you look at what you have to do for a constitutional amendment, and you look at the political landscape right now, we have a snowball's chance in hell of passing a constitutional amendment anytime soon. You need 2/3 of both houses of Congress to draft the language, send it to the states, and then you need passage by 3/4 of the state legislatures before ratification is possible. So is it hopeless? Is there no way to work around it? The good news is there is a way around it. And the name of the way around it is the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. It's a long, fancy name that means that the states that sign on to this contract pledge that they will instruct the electors in their state to cast their votes for the winner of the popular vote across all 50 states and the District of Columbia, once enough states have joined the compact to equal 270 electoral votes. Do you follow that? So we know that we need 270 to win the Electoral College. So each state joins the compact, they bring with it their number of electoral colleges, college votes. New Jersey was the second state in the union to join the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, and we have 14 votes. So what we're saying is New Jersey will instruct its 14 electors to cast those votes for the winner, not of the popular vote in New Jersey, but the popular vote in all 50 states and the District of Columbia, once enough states are in the compact that their collective number of Electoral College votes is equal to or greater than 270. Okay, I will take questions when we're done if this isn't clear to you yet. So this is what it looks like. How are they doing? How is the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact doing? So far, 15 states and the District of Columbia, adding up to 196 electoral votes, have signed on to the compact. On this map, the size, it's a funny looking map because the size of the state is the size of their Electoral College delegation. So the green ones are the ones that it's the states in which the Interstate Compact has been signed into law. The orange ones are the ones where one chamber of the legislature has passed it, the other has not. Yellow indicates passage by both chambers. Blue means it's at least getting a legislative committee, and gray it says it's been introduced, but they haven't even been able to get a hearing on this. So that gives you an idea of where you stand. In Maine, for example, the House has passed the Interstate Compact, but just last year the Senate of Maine voted it down. And there have been, just in 2019, there were a bunch of states that voted it in. New Mexico, Delaware, and Colorado all added their voices and signed the compact in 2019. And this is just this slide is just meant to show you that there has been bipartisan support for the Interstate Compact. The R's represent Republicans who have served on the advisory board. These are governors, senators, congressmen. The D's represent the Democrats. So it's been bipartisan. If we look at the map, I'm not going to hide it from you. If you look at those green states, they map to blue states on the Electoral College thing, right? And I was listening to a webinar the other night by a man who wrote a book called Let the People Elect the President. And he said that everyone is against the Electoral College unless and until it looks like it would give them a political advantage in the presidential election. And the way that things are right now in the country, the Republicans hold a bit of an edge in the Electoral College because of the demographics and that idea that even small states get those 2 senators equaling 2 Electoral College votes. So they're still working hard, but it's a bit stuck right now. So what does the Constitution say about this anyway? Is this national popular vote, interstate compact, even constitutional? Well, of course, the people who support it say that it is. The people who support it include the League of Women Voters. The League has this position since 1970 against the Electoral College for the direct election of the president, and they support the interstate compact as an interim measure in that. So the people who support the compact say, yes, it is constitutional. Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution is what talks about the Electoral College, and this is all that it has to say. It says, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to their congressional delegation. So it abdicates the authority to decide how electors vote over to each state. And right now, 48 of the states have instructed their electors, many of them by statute, to vote for the winner of the popular vote within the state. And once they sign the compact, they change that to say it will be the winner of the popular vote in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. And just 2 weeks ago, you may have noticed that the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the authority of the states to hold their electors accountable to vote as they were told by the state. They had some what they call unfaithful electors, I think in Washington state and in Colorado, and Washington and Colorado tried to punish them, and the appeal went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court held up the authority of the states. And I believe that that bodes well for the authority of the states to enter into the interstate compact. So here's what you can do. If this has been an argument that has spoken to you and give you thought and pause, here are the things that you can do. You can push for a constitutional amendment, and you can safeguard New Jersey's national public vote interstate compact. Here's the difference between the compact and the amendment. We showed you how difficult it is to change the Constitution. It doesn't happen lightly. It's only happened 26 times in the 200 plus years of our existence. So there's stability to a change that's made by a constitutional amendment. There's only been one amendment that has been undone, and that was prohibition. All others have stood. The national popular vote interstate compact, by contrast, is an act of the legislature, a state legislature. So the next state legislature can undo it, so that there's not nearly the protection and the stability in the interstate compact. The interstate compact agreement does have a provision that says that a state can't pull out of it less than 6 months, yes, 6 months before an election. So a state can't realize that their electoral college votes could make a difference in favor of a specific candidate and opt out of the contract to avoid voting for the national popular vote winner. So in order to do these two big things, we'd like you to kind of, if there's a lull in the conversation, next time you're sitting with family or on a Zoom meeting, bring up the Electoral College. Tell them why it's not a good idea. You can host this. The presentation is available to you if you feel you're comfortable doing it. It's yours to present to any group you want to, and the League of Women Voters is available to present it to any group you'd like to show it to. Just make a request. We can, even though New Jersey senators support the constitutional amendment, it doesn't hurt if the opportunity arises to urge Booker and Menendez to support the constitutional amendment abolishing the Electoral College. We can make sure that our state legislatures know about the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. It was enacted a number of years ago. The new state legislatures may not even be aware of it, and we want to make sure that they pledge to keep it in place. If you haven't already, we invite you to join the League of Women Voters, and you can follow the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact on Facebook. And that's you just Google it and you'll find all the contacts to them. So with that avalanche of information, maybe we can take some questions. These are some, the League of Women Voters website where I will post these slides is League of Women Voters of Southern Monmouth County, LWVSMC.org. And we owe a debt to the League of Women Voters in Wilmette, Illinois, who have been championing this change for years and have provided some of the data for us. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see Ken and you can see me. And Jim, anybody who wants to can put their camera on.
Yeah, let's go to Q&A, but as a host, I guess, let me take, just want to make a comment, just to emphasize the point that Peggy made. I can tell you for a fact that one of the very important points was that because of the way how Electoral College worked, there's a lot more attention paid to the battle states or the swing states. And I can tell you in practice, for example, even this year, not to pick on them, but the Democratic National Convention, the logistics has been a nightmare. And just think about, a lot of people descending into one city and the hotel rooms gets filled up. Well, guess what? It turned out that the members of the swing states or the battle states get into hotels that are in closer proximity to the national convention. So that just kind of show you in very subtle ways where a lot of the candidates and a lot of things are paying more attention, spending more money to those swing states. So in some way, I mean, New Jersey is kind of funny, right? And depending on what party you belong to, you're happy that New Jersey is a Democratic state. On the other hand, to a large extent, you could say we're taking for granted. Now, if we were a swing state, maybe the funding for Gateway Tunnel and some of the other things, or maybe instead of giving, 83 cents on the dollar that we sent to Washington, we could be like Kentucky or something like that, right? So I can tell you that point, sometimes people don't think about it, but it is a very important point. So sorry, that wasn't a question, but if anyone has a question, I think right now we're a small enough group. If you want to raise your hand, I think I can do that and call it Carol. Looks like you're the first one. I'm not sure.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment that kind of goes along with what Peggy was saying. I read a New York Times article within the past month, and the one thing that stuck in my mind about this article was that in the near future, meaning like the next 10, 15 years, 70% of the population of the United States will live on either coast. And it will wind up, because of the way the government is set up, especially the Electoral College, that we will have only 30% of the power, okay? While the Midwest, with 30% of the population, will have 70% of the power.
Yes, that's based on the distribution in Congress.
Right.
Right, because every state gets 2. as the population bleeds out of the heartland and goes to the more populous states, they still get that disproportionate power in Congress. And so I read that article too. There's a question, Ken, on the chat room. Should I read it?
Yes, please. Did I miss
Okay,
that?
it's from Caroline. Unless Caroline would like to ask the question. Okay.
Hi. Hi.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? I know I don't have my video on, but yes, go ahead. You can read the question. Thank you.
Okay, just curious, do you know whether anyone considered abolishing the Electoral College at the time of the adoption of the 13th Amendment? I'd be interested to know. I don't know that as for sure, but I do not believe there was any discussion of abolishing the Electoral College when the 13th Amendment ended slavery. And so, I mean, that the logic there is that once you take that incentive away, right, then the reason for the Electoral College is also being eroded, but there was no discussion of that. And then when they gave the vote in the 15th Amendment to former male slaves, again, there was no mention of, it's the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, the 15th Amendment gave the vote to male former slaves. So as I said, the Constitution gives the authority over elections to the states, and they've intervened 3 times with a constitutional amendment to override the state authority. The first was in the 15th Amendment saying, yeah, you guys have the authority, but you can't do anything that would deprive the vote based on race. And then they did it again with the 19th Amendment saying, yeah, but you can't do it. You can't deprive the vote based on sex. And then they did it again when they changed the voting age to 18. So that was the federal government intervening in elections, overriding the constitutional delegation of election power to the states. Anyone else have a question?
I have a question.
Mindy?
Yeah, hi. I have 2 questions. First one is, my question is why not all the states support the National Popular Vote Interstate PAC? Is it because the way it is, it supports one party more than the other? And the second question is, the idea of a third party system, I mean, you know, there's been attempts to do it, but no one really got traction. Except maybe Sanders, but he had to run as a Democratic Party. Under the current system, it just looks like all but impossible for a third party to run and win. Is that right? Because it looks so entrenched.
What a third? Well, let me see. So your first question was why aren't they? Why isn't everybody? If this is such a good idea, how come everybody isn't jumping on the bandwagon, right? The reason they're not jumping on the bandwagon is because at this point in time, they perceive an advantage to their party in the Electoral College, right? And that is certainly proven out by the 2000 election and the 2016 election. In both cases, the Republican candidate lost the popular vote and won the Electoral College, right? So as long as that's the trend and that's the pattern, and you can look behind the map and understand why that's happening, they are saying, why? We're gonna give this up? I don't think so, right? We can lose the popular vote and win the election. We're not giving up that system, right? And then your second question was a third party candidate, right?
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing. Yeah. You know, and sometimes people ask me about the Maine and Nebraska system, right? 48 states have their electors cast their votes for the winner of the popular vote in their state. Maine splits it up, right? So like in Maine in 2016, I think 2 votes went to Clinton and 2 votes went to Trump. Is that right, Jim? I think so. My brother's on the call for me.
I was muted, sorry. Yes, that's right.
That's right, right. So that sounds like a very fair system, right? And yet the League of Women Voters doesn't support that system because in some races, think back to George Wallace, think back to Ross Perot, think back to Ralph Nader. You get third-party candidates who garner enough votes that in a given state,
Right.
they could win the electoral college votes for that. And if no candidate gets 270 electoral college votes, remember the 270, the majority of the 538 total electoral college votes. If you don't get a majority, you know what happens?
It goes to the House.
It goes to the House, and you know what happens in the House? Every state gets one vote. So California, with its millions and millions of people, right? It's 55 electoral college votes, gets the same one vote as the state of Wyoming with 500,000 people. So that's not at all a fair system, right? So we don't. So that's a worst case scenario under. Now, if you then turn to the national public vote, it doesn't say I may have been saying the majority, but it's really the plurality of votes in the popular vote that would win the national popular vote.
So that
right?
requires 51%.
And it's not 50,
plus.
right? It
Right.
doesn't require 51%. It's just the plurality of votes, right?
Okay.
So it actually couldn't. I truthfully, off the top of my head, I can't remember, but I think I've read an argument in how it can favor third-party candidates to run, and I can't remember what the logic was, but there are some people who can make that argument, not me.
So one of the examples you use of a presidential candidate that won the popular votes but didn't become president. I know you have 5 listed, but in 1824, when John Quincy Adams went against Andrew Jackson, in fact, we had a situation, I believe Andrew Jackson had more popular votes than John Quincy Adams, but neither one of the candidates had the majority of the electoral college votes. So they actually, that particular election, they go to the House and they decide on, John Quincy Adams. So very interesting. Actually, we have seen that happen in the past. More than 100 years ago, but we have seen that,
Right. The idea is that, getting back to the Quakers and the request for this, that there are certain structural problems that we have, whether it's redistricting, voter suppression, the Electoral College, that they don't get the airtime and the emotional investment that some of the red meat kind of issues get, but they're foundational to our democracy. And they're the kind of things that the League of Women Voters is working on. And I really appreciate that you would spend this time learning about it yourself, because it's really foundational to the health of the democracy.
All right, any other questions? Oh, Carol, I thought it's only one per customer, but we'll make the exception.
This is not a question. Peg, I think you might have mentioned it. On August 13th, we're going to have another one of these hot topics on polling.
Oh yes, thank you for mentioning that. So that, remember at the beginning, I told you that this talk became one of our hot topics. We have a hot topic on August 13th. And let's see, what would be the best way for anyone to get that information?
Why don't you email it to me if you got a flyer or a link or something? I can share that within our group and others. And certainly the people who are registered for this, so this is the second of a talk we had. Last month we did a presentation on nonpartisan elections, which is very interesting as well too. So yeah, if you could share that with me, I could certainly direct that to the people that seems to show some interest. The other thing I get, since we're on that topic, is at least for me personally, I find would be very interesting is redistricting, especially now with the vote to delay that. You folks have anything planned for that?
The League of Women Voters?
Yeah. Or anywhere else in terms of with the impact of redistricting, especially with the new census and stuff like that, or just
Our state office is heavy into that. So you can go to the League of Women Voters NJ, and there's all kinds of information and webinars and stuff for that too.
Oh yeah, no, I was hoping someone would have a presentation, someone like a Peggy that knows this thing.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, you can contact the state office and ask for Helen. She'll do it.
Yeah, no, I know Helen. Sure. Okay. Yeah, because I think that's fascinating, not just because of the current issue where they're going to delay that, possibly delay that if,
Right, right.
the certification comes after a certain date and so on. But, I do know that one of the strategies that, one unnamed party that begins with an R made back after the census of, 2010 was to actually control the redistricting in the legislative and so on, is because it will have an impact on the congressional side, the House and stuff like that, and the ability to suppress voting in a number of states, which impacts. And so, they were fairly successful with that strategy. And unfortunately, we only recognize that a little bit late. But so that it's got tremendous impact. So I thought that would be interesting next topic for us.
We have another hot topic. Our hot topic in August is about the art and science of political polling, because you can see how much polling influences the perception of what's a battleground state and what
Voting has
isn't.
been surveyed, you mean, right? Just want to be sure.
Yeah, right, right.
Mhm.
You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely. And what's
and-
worse now is you got instant polling and so on. Now, obviously, you got the major polling service that does that, but there's more and more because of the changes in technology. There are a number of services that can do fairly quick turnaround, targeted vote polling that makes it really interesting to see. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about that too. So
the speaker for that one is Monmouth University Polling Institute.
yeah, and they're one of the major big threes in there. Okay. Well, as I said, if you have those, why don't you share, if you don't mind, I mean, email me and I can share that with our group. I think we got a number of people that would be very interested.
Okay.
Yeah,
And Ken, if I'm sorry, go ahead, Minnie.
Yeah, just a quick question. You were saying that one of the non-participation is one of the greatest threats to democracy. And for me, during the recent election with Trump, it seems like a lot of people were turned off with the politicians. Like, the pundits were saying that vote for Trump was a message against Congress. That, sometimes people vote for their presidential candidate, but once in office, they don't listen to them. So Trump was almost like a message to Congress saying, if you don't listen to us, we're going to go and vote for, somebody completely not a politician. So, and with Hillary, it seems like a lot of people didn't vote for her because she didn't have a message. A lot of people just didn't show up. So, I mean, what do you think of that idea that we don't have, the DC is broken, sort of, like they don't listen, they don't represent us once in office. Like, we vote for them, but once in office, they don't represent us. They represent special interest. So it's kind of going outside of this Electoral College problem, but there seems to be another big problem, which is
that's Mindy, I'm sorry, but that's a topic for another, that's a major issue.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, but we were just talking about what are the reasons
Citizens United. You're
vote.
talking about dark money. You're talking about the challengers to incumbents. I mean, they all wrap in there, but a lot to do with campaign financing and so on. And it's amazing. If you ever have to run a campaign, that's how you learn a lot about all these things. When challengers up against incumbents and the ability to raise money, the ability where the contributions are coming from, all of that. If you read all this stuff, that's actually another topic that I want to bring up at some point to get someone to talk about that and what the impact on democracy and voting in Canada, the impact of campaign financing, whether public subsidized campaign financing could help or not help and things like that. So
yeah, I agree with Ken that campaign financing is a big deal. But for example, with Obama, once he won, he ran on, he's going to get Wall Street. He's going to arrest people who defrauded the country. But twice he won and he never went after the Wall Street people. So it shows that the problem is not just getting to win, but once in office, they turn around and don't represent the people. So when you have these experiences over and over again, people will not be incentivized to participate.
Mindy, I didn't mean to imply that if we fix the Electoral College, if we abolish the Electoral College, our problems will go away. I just wanted to,
I
I guess,
know.
I guess
I just
one
wanted
of,
to know your thoughts.
one of my motivations, I guess, is in the age that I went to school, I didn't learn any of this about the Electoral College. The way it was presented was very different. It was a way of protecting small states, and you know, and I just was somewhat angry, I guess, when I started to do the reading, to say, wait a minute, this is so different from the way it was presented to me. I don't know if that was any of your experiences, but it was presented as a good idea.
Right.
Yeah, well,
like
that's
to
still around. That because as we were promoting this particular event, there were comments, you know, about Electoral College, and in fact, it helped to protect the small states. So that is still being perpetuated.
Right, and there's I mean, that's a whole other talk, but
Yeah.
there are materials that show that just doesn't apply.
All right. Well, we kept you a long time. Does anyone else have any more questions? Last call.
Nope.
No?
Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you, Peggy.
Thank you. That was terrific. Thank you.
I told you guys, after that meeting, I said, I got to give up more opportunities for Peggy to talk and present the group. So I probably could have stolen her slides and try to present it myself, but you know, you need the original. You need the original Peggy, because I was so impressed, and I thought she was really informative and has such deep knowledge of it. So Peggy, thank you very much. I know you've been very busy with the primary, especially with, that the count's still going on. And I saw in Monmouth County, only 55% of provisionals were counted as of today. And I can tell you, I know in Homedale, we still got, oh God, I think over 300 provisionals that I don't believe that they counted yet, because it's certainly not posted. And so you've been busy, and we really appreciate your time and sharing with us. Hopefully, I think I can speak for the group. I find it, even though I heard it before and seen the slides in preview, it was still fascinating, very interesting. But then I'm a nerdy kid. What can I tell you? But thank
By
you very
definition,
much.
all of us.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
yeah. So one last thing is, if you have, either you or Carol or whatever, if you guys have other interesting meetings, presentation, whatever, please feel free to share with us, and I'm happy to share with our group and spread the news. So thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Sure.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Ken.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Let's see. Due to technical glitches, I'm going to end this now before.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, guys, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you, Peggy.